Alright, so today we're going to be making a spaceship. And I originally was going to make this to scale, so I even went and added in a basic character like skeleton, but I ended up kind of disregarding this later, so if the skeleton disappears halfway through, that's why. Alright, so we're going to tab into edit mode and drag the basic cube up on the z-axis so it's level with the ground, and I'm going to add in a loop cut along the y-axis and delete half the cube. In the modifier tab, I'm going to add in a mirror modifier and check clipping. A mirror modifier makes it so everything you do on one side automatically gets done to the other side of your model, and clipping makes sure that the model sticks to itself and it doesn't separate. Alright, big disclaimer here. I have been watching Guardians of the Galaxy recently, and in it, the ships kind of look like big birds, so that's kind of where I was headed with this ship, was to make it look like a huge bird of prey. So I started by sliding the cockpit out and giving it kind of an angular, almost triangle look, kind of like a head or a beak, if you will. And yeah, so it's good to look at reference too when you're making models like this. So I also kind of modeled mine off of a plane just a little bit, as you'll see with the wings and the way the body works. Anyways, I just kind of dragged around and positions the cockpit kind of the way I think would look best, and you can do it however you want. I kind of like this like slight downward slope a little bit. Once you get a shape that you're kind of happy with, you can Alt E and then extrude along normals to create the body of the ship. And you may be thinking to yourself, this looks awful, and I should say mine, yeah, doesn't look very good. However, I plan to go in later and add in more secondary details like beveling and give it more depth and stuff. This is just like a mock-up. All right, I'm gonna Shift D and duplicate this side piece here, and I'm gonna scale it in and scale it around. And this is gonna be our wing. So I'm going to Alt-E extrude along normals and extrude it out. This is going to be kind of the main wing function, I'm thinking, and all the bits of wing are going to come off of this. So I kind of wanted wings coming off the end and then wings coming back off this angular bit here. So I want to give it kind of a steep angle just so it has lots of room for that. I'm going to select the whole thing and drag it up so it's kind of level with the top of the ship. That looks kind of nice right around there. And we're going to fill in the spaces between the wing and the ship later, so don't worry about that. Anyways, okay, I'm going to duplicate this piece here, Shift D, and slide it out. And then I'm going to Alt-E extrude out again, and yeah, let's make it nice and big. All right, cool. I'm going to select these vertices here and double-click G to slide both vertices back along the edge. And make it so it's like almost flat along the x-axis. And I'm going to Shift D, duplicate it again, and extrude out one more time. And this is going to be kind of like the long wing tails. I'm going to press SY0 to straighten this so it's flat along the x-axis. And then I'm going to just position it where I think this looks nice. Okay, so I'm going to select this whole chunk of wing, and I'm just going to scale it down along the Z. And then I'm going to just scale the end down even more so it kind of tapers off. Then I'm going to select this wing chunk and do the same thing again and scale it down so that way it's kind of a mid-level between the end wing, which is super thin, and the main frame of the wing at the front. At this point, I was kind of thinking the wings look too chunky to just have in one big segment back there, so I decided to add some loop cuts in the middle and separate them out. So this is something I'm going to be doing a lot during this video, is where I select an object that I want to be separated, and I'm going to Shift D to duplicate it, and then I'm going to press H to hide that object. And then once that's hidden, I will reselect the part that I want gone and do X and delete them. So now the wings are in two separate parts, and I'm going to keep that other side hidden, and I'm going to select these loops here and press F to fill. So that way I have one small wing now, and I'm going to double click G on these faces here. And this segment of wing was being difficult, so I actually decided to just slide it along the X-axis. And once you get something you're happy with, you can Alt H and unhide the wings again. And then I'm going to repeat the process for the other side and select those open faces and just press F to fill. Okay, so now we have two wing segments, but I'm going to separate them out even more because they're kind of too close together. So just select where you want or what you want and then just drag it to where you think it should go. And I kind of like this almost like fingery type feathery open wing structure here. And just scale it and slide it till it looks nice. Like if you think they look too chunky, then you can scale them in, or if you think they're not wide enough, then you can expand them. It's all up to you. It's all preference. Okay, once you get something that looks good, just Shift D the ends here, and then we're gonna Alt E extrude out again. And just it's a repeat of the same process. So I sped mine up just to get through it a bit faster. But if you ever have any problems when extruding or extruding along normals, it's probably because your normals have gotten messed up. In order to recalculate them, just select the object you want and press Shift N, and now we'll recalculate the normal, so then they should slide properly. I ran into this problem a few times throughout this model, so that's just a quick way to undo it. Anyways, yeah, it's just a complete process of what you already did for the wings before. So all right, now we're gonna make a connecting piece to hold up the wings. So I just duplicated the side piece again and scaled it down and repositioned it to where I like. And yeah, I kind of want like an understructure that kind of comes up and holds the wings in place. So basically at this point, I just do a lot of extruding and repositioning until it's kind of just barely under the wing. And yeah, that looks kind of cool. So I'm gonna make it a little more angular. So and then I'm gonna add in some more loop cuts along it, probably like 3 or so. And I plan to make these be kind of like beams. So I'm going to select those and Control B to bevel. I'm going to go through and select just the faces of the bevel that are showing on the bottom, and I'm going to Alt E extrude along normals to give it kind of like this nice, these nice kind of beams going along it. And yeah, that looks kind of cool. All right. Okay, at this point, I decide that I want to lower the bottom of the ship a little bit more and that I wanted to give the cabin cockpit area some more detail. So I added in some more loop cuts up there and just scaled along to give it a nice angular look. And again, we're going to bevel all this more later, so don't worry about it too much for now. But yeah, it looks better. Okay, so I'm going to start adding in some engines now. So underneath this big wing here, I'm going to select this face and do Shift S, which brings up a cursor objects menu, and I'm going to do cursor to selected. Now the 3D cursor is in the middle of this face, and I think I'm going to start with some engine holders. So I'm thinking kind of like big claws that are kind of reaching down and gripping the engine. So I started with adding in a cube, and I'm just going to position that so it's right up against the wing here. And then it's basically just an extrusion fest from this point on, where you're just extruding in and scaling down and extruding down. At this point, I really wanted the claws to kind of bend around and grip the engine on the side. So I'm control clicking the edge I have selected, which automatically extrudes it to the point you click. It's a little bit finicky, but if you just keep trying, you'll get it eventually. And once you get it to where you want it to be, you can SX0, which should line up everything so it's a flat edge now. And then I'm just going to extrude again here. And then I'm going to just make kind of a big area for the claws to be connected to. And for the claws, I'm just going to come in here and just duplicate the top face, and I'm just going to scale it in a little bit. And I'm going to do sort of a 2-part claw with like the main segment that's connected to this, and then a little second segment, which is a little bit more angled, which would be the part that makes contact with the, with the engine. So I'm going to take the top and bottom of this, and I'm gonna press I to inset it, and then Alt E extrude along normals to extrude, kind of to give it like a connecting piece in here. And they're not gonna be super high poly, but that's okay because no one's gonna be really looking at them anyways. So I'm gonna just duplicate it again and stick it up on top here. So that's gonna be the actual like pincer part that makes contact with the engine. And I think that looks kind of nice. I might just scale this down a little bit. Yeah, okay. And once you get them to kind of the size you want, you can rotate them a little bit more to give them kind of almost a Dr. Octopus kind of pincer pincer formation. And then once you get the where you want, you can duplicate it again and rotate around and put it on the bottom, and that completes the grabber. All right, you can select everything and just drag it all back so it's kind of by this by the wing support here, just sort of inset just a little bit. Yeah, it looks nice. All right, I'm gonna Shift A again and add in a cylinder now, and this is gonna be our main big engine that's gonna be on the wing. So I'm gonna rotate this 90 degrees along the x-axis and slide it down so it's right up against the pincer. We need a better name for that, but it'll work for now. Okay, so for this engine, I was taking a lot of influence from the way jet engines look, except instead of having fans in it, it's gonna have like a glowing, like spacey, sci-fi looking engine. So this is going to be another huge extrusion fest where you're just extruding out, I to inset in, and extruding in again, and then insetting, and yeah, basically get the idea. And you can do the same thing to the back too to make it kind of have this big like barrel quality to it, and you can smooth it out a little bit, and then I to inset and extrude, and inset and extrude. Basically just make some nice make some nice geometry for it. You get fancy. I decided to add these kind of long ridiculous tails onto the end of mine. You don't have to do that. I just thought it was kind of funny. So yeah, that's basically just how you do the engines. Okay, and once you're done with the engine, you can come back to the claw, and I'm going to select the outer faces here, and I'm going to I to inset them and Alt E to extrude along normals. And this just kind of gives it an extra little like geometry here. It kind of gives it almost like a metal quality so that it's not all in one big chunk. I'm going to select all these outer edges on the claw here like this, and I'm going to just give them a little bevel too, because there's just really no sharp edges just anywhere in real life. So, and bear in mind, we're going to bevel everything else on here pretty much too at some point. But I'm going to just start with these claws right now. And I'm going to scale them in a little bit because now they don't match because we extruded and insetted. So yeah, it looks better. So select those, and we're going to just give them a little bevel of their own just to give just a tiny little bit more realism. And yeah, all right. Well, that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to select all of that, and I'm going to duplicate it over and just move it to where it's touching again the engine. So now we have kind of a 2 grip setup on this side. And I'm going to then go back in. I'm going to select both of those claws, and I am going to Shift D and duplicate them. And then I'm going to invert their scale location by pressing X -1. And then I'm going to just bring them to the other side. So yeah, that looks good. Perfect. Now we have these 4 claws that are coming down and kind of holding in place the engine. And that looks pretty good. All right, at this point, I wanted to add in some connecting pieces for the wings. So I'm just going to inset them and extrude them in just a little bit, and then extrude them back out to give it kind of like the feeling there's an internal connection happening here. And you just do it for all the wings you want to do it for, or however you want, really. That's just how I chose to do mine. So yeah, once you do one, it's really easy to go through all the rest and complete them. And I ran into some issues here where the extruding them in meant that the wing went through itself. So basically, if you have any problems with that, either just don't extrude it very far, or you can like move it around a little bit with the along one of the axes. But this worked okay. I had to add in an extra loop cut over here just so that I could make the connectors for both these wing parts. Yeah, but that's not too hard. Now you notice when I try and press I here, it doesn't inset properly. So if you double tap I, that'll inset both faces separately. So that's also another thing that's going to be coming back a lot during this video is double pressing I to inset multiple faces separately as opposed to all together. All right, so I started trying to bevel the wings, but I was having some trouble with overlapping vertices, so I switched from offset to percent in the bevel settings here, and that'll just make it so the wings will only bevel as much as they can along certain edges. Yeah, so and then I just went through and then gave the wings some nice beveling. All right, so at this point in the game, I was deciding that I wanted to give these wings some nice paneling. So I just went and I selected some of these bigger faces here. And I just did the eye to inset. This is with the double eye so that it extrudes separately. And I'm going to Alt E to extrude up just the tiniest bit and give them some nice beveling. So now the wings have some extra detail in the form of paneling. And I think that looks much better. I'm also going to do the same thing I did to the pincers to these segment parts where I select them and I'm going to I to inset them and then Alt-E to extrude in to give them some extra geometry as well. And yeah, that looks much better. And you can just give some stuff like slight beveling if you want, just to add a little bit of extra, just a little bit of extra detail, because it really does look much nicer, and it pays off later in like rendering and stuff when the light can like wrap around things. Okay, so I'm also gonna go in and bevel the engine here too. So just select any faces you want by alt clicking, pressing shift to select multiple edges at once. Perfect. All right, well that is looking great. On the body of the ship, I'm going to add in some extra loop cuts along the sides and on the front here, just to give some extra detail. And I'm going to switch to edge mode and alt select these edges here. And I'm just going to give them some beveling and just make a nice like rounded shape here. And yeah, that's looking much better. However, before I bevel the sides, I want to come to the back of the ship and select the end here, and I'm going to scale it back to about where the wing stops. And I'm going to just extrude along normals and make it much longer and skin down the end here. And I'm going to bring this up so it's just a little bit above the roof of the ship to kind of give it almost the look of that a real plane has. And I'm going to kind of taper it in to give it sort of a nice sloping tail here. And this is optional, you can make it as long as you want, but my initial and final plan for this is I'm gonna make a big like door underneath here. So but we'll get to that later. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Anyways, at this point in the game, it's basically just scaling it to where you think it looks appropriate sized. And yeah, okay, that's looking better. All right, so along the bottom, I'm going to select some of these bottom faces and just kind of pull them down to give a nice, kind of a nice, almost like an underbulge here, just to make it look less flat. And I think that looks better like that. I'm going to select this top face here and Shift D it and scale it in just a little bit. And because that wasn't working for me, actually, I went and just selected sides at once and double-click G to slide them along their edges, because that works much better. And then this is going to eventually be a tail fin wing. So then I Alt-E extruded it up and then double-clicked G to extrude it back, and that looks pretty nice right there. And if you want to flatten the tops of those, you can select the face and then press Z0, and that will flatten them. Anyways, at this point, it's basically just selecting faces and double-clicking G to slide them around where you want to give it kind of a nice, thin, sloping geometry. Okay, and I think that looks pretty cool like that. Awesome. So now I'm going to select these side edges, and I'm going to give them a nice bevel. So now the ship is not nearly as sharp on the edge. Okay, that's looking nice. I'm going to select this under edge here too, and just give that by itself a nice bevel. Um, and yeah, it looks better. Cool. All right, so at this point, I'm gonna select these edges along here at the back, and I'm gonna bevel them in just a little bit to make it a little bit smoother. And then I'm gonna select these tail fins, just the whole thing, and I'm just gonna give them bevels of their own. It just kind of makes it seem more like they're separate pieces and not like it's just one fused giant hunk of metal, because that probably would not fly very well. All right. And speaking of one giant hunk of metal, honestly, I didn't like having the cockpit be attached to the ship. So I decided to select the whole entire cockpit here. And I'm going to Shift D to duplicate it. And then I'm going to hide what I just duplicated. And I'm going to delete the original cockpit. There's probably a faster way to do this, but I don't know what it is. All right. I'm going to Alt H to unhide it, and I'm going to slide it just and separate it just a little bit from the body. All right. I'm going to select these loose edges, and then I am going to press F to fill them, which is a little bit sloppy, but it will be okay for this. And I'm going to do the same to the cockpit too. All right. I'm going to just give these the tiniest little bevels just so that they're not completely flat, but if you bevel them too much, you're going to get some weird geometry, so I wouldn't do that. All right, now I'm going to select this interface. I'm going to Shift D it and scale it down and extrude it out. So now we have kind of a connecting piece connecting the two parts of the ship's body. To make a cockpit, I'm going to select two vertices on the front. I'm going to Control Shift B to bevel them. And that's going to give this nice kind of rounded bevel so I can extrude out all these faces. And at this point, it's just kind of scaling in this giant chunk here and rotating it until it kind of looks nice. So it doesn't look so good right now, but you can just, scale it and rotate it until it kind of just looks like a nice little raised up area that could be turned to glass later. All right, so at this point, just scale it in so it looks kind of nice, and we're going to bevel it afterwards, but it's good to give it some starting slopiness first. And unfortunately, because we did the bevel on the vertices earlier, that made it so that there's some loose vertices just floating around on this new piece, which screws up the beveling process. But that can be fixed by selecting a loose vertice and selecting a vertice that's connected to something, and then just merging them together. It's very easy and quick to do. And once you do that, you can reselect all those edges and re-bevel this. Perfect. So when I was envisioning this, I kind of had an idea to make these big kind of beams going across the glass, because it doesn't really make sense to have one huge chunk of glass, because that's not very structurally sound. So I just went through and selected some of these vertices along here that I thought would look nice to be kind of beams. And then once you got those selected, you can bevel them. Now, we've been using pretty big bevels, so I decided to turn down the segments very low so it's less sloped and just make it kind of a nice size. But before we drag those out, I'm going to select some of these other faces along what we previously beveled, and I'm going to extrude those out first, kind of make a frame. And then I'm going to select the new bevels that go across, and I'm going to just extrude those out along normals as well to kind of create like a overall structure that kind of holds the frame down. All right, that looks much better. All right, so we mostly got the shape down for our ship, but now I kind of want to add in some little like extra detail, so I decided to just go through and just inset some stuff and extrude other things to give it some paneling on the main body of the ship and on the cockpit. And as usual, when you make something new that you like, you can always bevel a little bit. On the top of the ship, I decided to inset all the faces by themselves and extrude them all up. And on the bottom, I added in some more loop cuts and then selected some of the bigger faces. And my idea down here was to kind of do the same thing, except extrude these faces up. So I gave them a little inset so they're not connected anymore and just extruded them up into the ship just a little bit to give it kind of a mainframe superstructure feel. And on the back, we're going to make a big door. So I added some more loop cuts and slid them around to make kind of a nice bay door shape, kind of like you might see on the back of a plane. And then I just selected all these faces and I extruded them in. And then I did the good old duplicate this, hide it, delete the original, and then Alt H to unhide, and I scaled it in a little bit just so there's a little bit of like space in between, and extruded it out just a little bit. Just to kind of, I don't know if it adds that much of anything, but I like it because it kind of makes it feel like separate pieces. On the wings, I'm going to select this piece here and do Shift S cursor to selected. And I'm going to select the wings, and I'm going to change the rotation orientation to 3D cursor. So now when I rotate it, it's going to rotate from the 3D cursor, and that looks great. I then went through and did the same thing to the lower part of this wing here, and it's just a repeat process, and you can do it for the other segments of the wing too. It's all very fast, but I just decided to speed it up just for the sake of time. All right, so at this point I was thinking, it looks cool, but like it should probably either have a landing gear or some sort of grounds thrusters to keep it hovering. So I added in a new cylinder underneath using the Shift S to select and put the cursor down there again. And these are gonna kind of be like little mini thrusters, just a little bit. So decided to bring them up, and then it's the same old story of the inset, extrude, and slide arounds type deal. Just make them look nice, honestly, and it's up to your imagination. You can add as much detail to these as you want. But my idea for these was to have more claws kind of coming down and holding them in place, and I didn't really want to model a whole new claw, so I actually decided to come in and just duplicate over one of the claws from the main engine and just drag it down and kind of reorient it so that it fits to the little thruster. So you can just go through and select the claw and then just drag it over. So right off the bat, this little thruster will not fit the size of our claw, so I just decided to scale everything up and kind of make it so the thruster fit the size of the claw. And then from this point out, it's just orienting the claw so it can actually reach the side of the ship, which is going to be pretty easy to do, so yeah, don't worry about it too much. And once you get it positioned where you want it, we can start trying to bring down that claw. So I did it by selecting the upper part of the claw and just scaling it down a little bit along the Z-axis, and then rotating it 90 degrees and dragging it over. Now for these loose bits here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on proportion editing, and I'm going to change it to connected only. So that way it will only drag around little bits of the model that are connected to the model that you're trying to move, and you can change how much it drags around by using the scroll feature on your mouse. And once you get it looking kind of nice, then you can just kind of position it along the side of the ship. And mine was way off, so I dragged it over again. And then once they're together again, you can position them along the ship where you want them to be. I decided to make two, so I duplicated it over to kind of give it some extra thrust on the bottom, and I think that helps out quite a lot and makes it look pretty nice. Cool. So I decided to position mine so that they're all along the edges on the ship that were already there, so that way they're kind of evenly spaced. Yeah, and that looks pretty good. On the wings, I'm going to add in just a little extra detail. By selecting these faces, I'm going to I to inset them in Alt-E extrude them in. I'm going to Shift-D to duplicate them and drag them up a little bit. and I'm gonna just rotate this wing piece just a little bit, and Alt E to extrude again to give it just kind of like a little wing flap, kind of like you see on real planes. I don't know. I don't know if it makes any sense to have it there, but I was kind of thinking they would be used to catch the air and wind, like during landing and stuff. Anyways, and I'm gonna do the same thing to this one, but for this wing segment, it's a lot harder to rotate it around. So that can be bypassed by changing the orientation here from global to normal. So that way, when you rotate it, it'll rotate along the way that the model or the piece of geometry is oriented. So that way you can just rotate it and not have to worry about it rotating weird. Anyways, all right, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to end the video here, and the next part will be all about texturing, and then we can get it looking like the model I showed at the beginning.